Hi there. Welcome back to Behind the Unicorn, How Nonprofits Really Work. I'm Emily Davis. We're going to be talking about founders, nonprofit founders, in episode 4 here, and there is a lot to say. Before I get started and talking about all things nonprofit founders, I wanted to give a shout out to Amanda Mayo. I actually worked with her, hired her about 4 years ago to help me understand podcasting. She coached me in developing my podcast outline and format and created things like storyboards and taught me how to do some of the technical pieces. And I sat on this for a really long time, and really honestly out of a little bit of fear and a little bit out of imposter phenomenon, and decided through the support of some really wonderful folks recently to hit record. I mean, who cares if it's not perfect? I don't expect this to be a viral podcast, but I want to have some fun and I want to share what I know and invite other people who I really respect and some I don't even know to come and share their experiences. But none of this would be happening without Amanda. And I thought I would shout out, and it's going to be reversed in the screen here, but this book, Podcasting, How to Start a Podcast and Create a Profitable Podcasting Business. This is Amanda's book. I would strongly recommend it. The nice thing is it's actually not like, it's got nice big font. It's not overwhelming. Like, it's really fantastic. And Amanda helped me create things even like primers for guests so they know what to expect, and really helped me build things out and build out the concept. I'm not starting off exactly how we had planned, and it doesn't matter because I'm just doing it. As Brene Brown talks about being brave, I'm being brave, but I'm really appreciative of Amanda and wanted to recommend her book as a resource. Okay, so to get started on the conversation about founders, where to begin? Many of us in the nonprofit sector, either as board members or staff members, have had experience with founders. I myself have been a founder of nonprofits, specifically co-founder. I'm hoping actually one of my co-founders might come on the podcast at some point to talk about that experience together, which was pretty serendipitous and pretty fantastic. But that is a story for another time. But I have been a founder and I know what that looks like. I was very lucky to have had a mentor in graduate school named Richard Mail, who many people know, very well known, very well respected locally, statewide, nationally, and even internationally. He passed away, unfortunately, but was just a powerhouse in terms of organizing and teaching. And he himself was a founder and talked very openly, when I knew him, about the importance of understanding your role as a founder and knowing when to leave. And I think it helped me understand my role as a co-founder and plan for when to leave. And then later in other leadership roles had that same experience. So let's start out at the beginning, because that's usually the best place, if we can start there, is starting as a founder. So let's say you are starting a 501c3, 501c4, 501c6 organization. Those are the most common three. Typically, we're talking about a 501c3 organization. And again, 501c3 is a tax status. It is not a business model. You're going to hear me say that all the time. When starting a nonprofit, more often than not, it's completely volunteer run at the beginning. The founder is the person who generally gravitates towards that primary leadership role. Once that tax exempt status is secured, that's when you officially, as a founder, need to decide if you are going to be the chief executive of the organization or if you're going to be on the board. Oftentimes, more likely, the board chair. But you got to pick a lane. You cannot be both. And here's why. I'll put my blog post about this in the show notes as well. But the board's job with the leadership of the board chair is to provide oversight and support and selection of the chief executive. If you are the chief executive, otherwise known as the executive director, the chief executive officer, you can't oversee yourself as a board member. It's also a conflict of interest. So you cannot be both. You got to pick a lane. And the sooner you pick the lane, the better. So either you are the liaison between board and future staff or volunteers, and really leading all the programmatic efforts, fundraising, all of that, operations of the organization, or you are the chair of the board and providing governance oversight. Now, a lot of times, and I'm going to talk about this more, I don't want to throw too much at you, but in board governance, there's different types of boards. There's the organizing or founding board, which we typically refer to as working board. Please stop using the phrase working board. All boards work, they just work differently. There's no such thing as a non-working board. That's not true. There's a board type called governance as observation where they're not really doing anything, but ideally all boards work, they just work differently. So stop using the phrase working board. Okay. So there's the organizing or founding board, and that's typically a board of an organization that is primarily, if not completely, run by volunteers, right? They're grassroots. And then we have a governing board, which you tend to have at this point, you tend to have more staff and a little bit more structure, policies, procedures, things like that. And institutional boards are typically what folks think of as fundraising boards. So boards who are more involved in raising money or contributing large dollar amounts. Anyway, the reason why that's important is if you're a founder of an organization and you're going to be on the board, you're going to have an organizing and founding board, and it's going to be very sort of grassroots, right? So whether you're the executive director or the board chair, you want to bring in people around you who are going to challenge you. They're not going to be yes people, right? They're going to complement your skills. For example, I teach it now, or I have in the past. I'm not outstanding at financial management. I'm not an accountant. So I want to make sure I have people in this role, in this scenario around me who understand nonprofit financial management. So let's assume, just for the sake of this conversation, that the founder is the executive director or the chief executive officer, which is really the most common thing. In thinking about your board, do not recruit friends and family to the board. I had one example. I was doing a training, and the board chair of this organization was this woman, and the executive director was her daughter. Like, that is not good. That is not how you run a business. If it's a family business, sure. But this is a nonprofit. As soon as you get your nonprofit tax exemption, you are now responsible to the public. A mom, or vice versa, a mom, a dad, a family member overseeing another family member is a serious conflict of interest. Don't do it. Also, recruiting friends and family to the board increases the likelihood that you're going to get people who aren't challenging you, who are those, sort of yes people. you want to look for people with experience and hopefully some trained experience, but sometimes that's that dream we can't attain. We want to recruit people who have some nonprofit board experience and are willing to learn. I always say the greatest board members don't have all the answers. They know what questions to ask, and they engage in participatory decision making. They understand, or at least are willing to learn their roles and responsibilities as board members. You may have friends and family who are knowledgeable in those areas. Be really, really clear that when they are providing board service, they are not your family member. They are not your friend. In that role, their responsibility is to the mission and the sustainability of the organization, and even greater, the public. The other thing I would say is that once you get that tax status as the founder, it's not your organization. It does not belong to you. It belongs to the public. It is responsible to the public. One of the reasons that the tax exemption status is set up the way it is that nonprofits have a higher level of responsibility, require a higher level of transparency, because in exchange for that tax exemption, we are expected to be more transparent, to demonstrate to the public that we're doing what we said we're going to do, and we're doing it to the best of our ability. So as the founder, once that tax exemption status comes in, it's not about you anymore. It has nothing to do with you anymore. It has to do with you in terms of if it sinks or swims and the work you do, but it's ultimately about the mission. The organization is responsible to the public in fulfilling or working on its mission and vision. We have to, as founders, and it's not easy, but we have to put our egos aside and put the mission first. Everything comes for the mission. I always say the best way to approach leadership is to approach it with curiosity. Much like with board members, you actually don't, no one's required to have all the answers, but asking the right questions becomes really critical. And I have seen organizations become overly reliant on a founder, and that founder really thinks they have all the answers, and that's just not possible. It's not possible for us to have all the answers. So it doesn't really make sense that we bring our big egos into the conversation. What is absolutely critical is putting the mission first. So we have to separate our personal identities from the nonprofit. The organization is not a reflection of you. It's not your personal brand. That's a lot. That's some tough stuff to hear. If you started a nonprofit, and this is sort of a little bit of like organizational or industrial psychology here. If you've started a nonprofit, it feels like your baby. It can feel that way all day long. It's not yours. I talked to a woman once who just totally disagreed with me. And I could see that she was like, yeah, it's mine. It doesn't belong to you. If you wanted to start your own business, that belongs to you. LLC, you start a family business, a private company, that's yours. You call whatever you want. I mean, look at my consulting companies, Emily Davis Consulting. It's mine. It's my personal brand. I start the Save the Pet Rock Foundation. It's not mine. I'm a part of it. I'm an important part of it, but it's not about me. It's a tough distinction when we put our blood, sweat, and tears into starting an organization. But that's why I'm bringing this up, is because I want people to have a resource in this podcast to pass on to other people founding nonprofits, thinking about founding nonprofits, like know what to expect going into it so that you can sort of get your mind right around it. It's a lot easier to go into these situations having clear expectations and knowing it's not about you, as opposed to being 5 years in and having the sort of shock of hearing something like that and then having to course correct, which most people aren't going to. It's too hard. So I get that. And that's why we're talking about it. Okay, so let's say now you're actively the founder of the organization. Really important from the beginning. Learn what your leadership style is. There's a lot of different ways to do this. I'm not going to promote specific models or tools, but whatever works for you, determine a leadership style that works and never stop learning. Learning about leadership and nonprofit leadership is an ongoing practice. The other things I would say is, much like your nonprofit needs to be transparent, communicate with your board, communicate with your staff, your volunteers. Be vulnerable. This is a tough one. But being vulnerable, again, means saying, I don't know the answer to that. It's okay. Listen, when COVID hit, most nonprofits, because we're made up of humans, went, we don't know how to do this. And we figured it out. But it's like the first step is admitting you don't know. We are living in many ways, an unprecedented time, arguably not unprecedented and not unexpected because we were told what was coming. But there's a lot of people who have organizations that were not prepared for this. And it's terrifying, but we are resilient and we will pivot and we will adjust. It's as scary as it is, but if we are honest about we don't know what to do, then we can come up with the answers. In addition to being honest with others, be honest with yourself. How personal are you making this nonprofit? Are you making it all about you? How much are you trying to control within the organizations, the programs, the services? Just because it was your vision doesn't mean that things don't shift. And it's important to be able to let go of some of that control. Sometimes we've got the skills as leaders to get the organization started, but the organization may shift. It will shift, frankly, but it may shift sooner rather than later. And you don't have to always know what's supposed to happen, but you have to be willing to adjust. That means learning new skills, asking for help, changing your approach. Sometimes it means stepping down. That's not a bad thing, right? But you have to be honest with yourself about, can you walk away? Have you set things up in a way that you can leave or you can change? When you're the founder, assuming you have no paid staff or very little paid staff or it's all volunteers, be prepared that you're going to be doing everything. You may get some help, but I think mentally, if you have the expectation that I'm going to need to either do myself or find nonprofit accounting, board development, revenue generation, otherwise known as fundraising, program design and evaluation, marketing. Most people, when they get involved with a nonprofit, I'm going to say 99%, although that's not like a researched number. Most people get involved because they're really excited about the programs and services. They're really excited about the reason for existence. They are not excited about P&L reports. They are not excited about the marketing strategy or the development plan. You got to be ready for that. And so as the founder, it's important that you understand or learn a little bit, or at least enough, about all of these things to successfully run the business side of the nonprofit. Really, really critical, because it's going to fall on you and you're going to be working more than you thought. Nonprofits aren't a hobby. They are a business. Again, we are not run on rainbows and unicorn farts. We have to run a business that is sustainable, and that takes a lot of hard work. I also recommend setting up evaluation, either for the founder, either as a chief executive or a board member, setting up evaluation from the beginning. If annual evaluation of the chief executive is absolutely critical. You need a job description. And think about if this was beyond you, right? Like for the next executive director. Is there a board job description? Is there an annual evaluation process? What does it look like? And I'll just give it a side story about this. Evaluation is super important and not well understood. I was doing strategic planning for an organization many years ago. They'd had their executive director, who was not the founder, who'd been there 7 years. I think that's right. And during the strategic planning process, had asked that we really prioritize a chief executive assessment for him, which, of course, like, that's very important. I would recommend that anyway. But he'd never had one, and he really wanted one. So during the board retreat, we really focused in on part of the retreat talking about the importance of evaluation and what it looks like. And there was a gentleman in the front row who just like had his arms crossed and his face scrunched the whole time. So, are there any questions? And the gentleman said, I don't agree with you, which I thought was fascinating. Didn't know it was agree or disagree in that conversation, but here we are. He said, I don't agree with you. If I have a problem with him, I'll tell him. Yeah, that's not evaluation. Evaluation ideally is a 360-degree approach, meaning you get feedback from a variety of stakeholders, including the CEO, about their work. The other ideal, I would say, is that assessment is conducted externally. I have assessments that I do with executive directors. I happen to think BoardSource has a good one that is not super expensive and really accessible. And I think it's a great starting point. I think it's called ACE, Assessment of Chief Executive. But you want to have that from the beginning. The job description is really where you're starting with expectations. And that the job description can always change, but giving yourself that to start with, so then there's something to measure against. No one's going to expect anybody to be perfect. There's always going to be areas of success and challenges, but having something to start with is really important. The next thing I'm going to say is that, and this is absolutely so important, I cannot emphasize this enough. One of the biggest mistakes I see in nonprofit startup is when the founder comes in and has no plans or strategy to be financially compensated. The amount of problems this costs down the line is just bonkers to me. There is value in the role of chief executive. You need to be paid. The board needs to research the market value of similar organizations in your area. What is a reasonable amount of money to pay an executive director? Not just you as the founder, but if you were going to hire an external executive director, not the founder, right now, what would you pay them a living wage to do that job? Full-time, part-time, I don't care what it is. One of the problems with the nonprofit sector and overall nonprofit culture is there's this huge sense of martyrdom, right? Like there isn't real value to what we do. You should just sacrifice your time and your soul to give. No. The nonprofit sector is a professional sector. We are businesses. People, in order to keep people in the nonprofit sector, we need to pay them. And it's not volunteering with a tip. You need to pay people a living wage, a strong value, and be competitive in the market. Yep, that's a thing in nonprofits. If you are a founder as the executive director and you don't want to get paid, I don't care. You should get paid. Get paid. Donate it all back to the nonprofit. Perfect. In-kind contribution as an executive director is really, really dangerous. Here's why. You are not setting the organization up for long-term financial sustainability and success. Let's say the founder, just for the sake of this conversation, is there for 5 years. It is too much of a swing for the board and the staff, assuming there is staff, to go from an unpaid, sacrificing executive director to the resentment of having to pay an executive director. It is a complete mindfuck. Don't do it to your organization. Again, set up a salary or hourly rate, whatever you do. It doesn't matter. I mean, it does legally, but whatever you choose, make sure it is reasonable, it is sustainable, and it would support another person if it wasn't you as the founder. And the board is responsible for that. They're responsible for providing oversight and making sure the compensation is there for the executive director. These are actual skills that people have as executive directors. It's not a hobby. In fact, I remember speaking of Richard Mille, he and I were talking once, and he said, if I had all things equal, if I were a for-profit company hiring for a director position, I had 2 candidates. Everything was even except one had nonprofit leadership experience and one didn't. I would hire the nonprofit leader every time. They know how to problem solve in a different way. They know how to work under pressure. They understand the hustle harder than any for-profit. And maybe that's incorrect, but I tend to agree with him. We have a lot of hustle in us, and there is value to that. And if you're new to the nonprofit sector, the further along you get in your nonprofit experience, the more you learn how much this is true. Which there's a whole nother conversation about compensation and reasonable compensation in there, and I can talk about that at a different time. But the point being, again, this is where we come back to, as a founding nonprofit, it's not about you. It's about the mission. And not compensating the role of the executive director undervalues that role and creates a reliance dynamic that makes it impossible for the organization to last after the founder in a really sustainable way. And if you're paying other people, you're paying consultants, you're paying staff, there's no reason you shouldn't be able to raise the funds to pay the chief executive. Again, revenue generation. This is about the value of the position, not you personally. So compensating your executive director, incredibly important. Don't sleep on it. You may not have the money at the beginning, but that needs to be a goal. These are experts and professionals. Even if you don't start out as one, when you leave, you will have a lot of knowledge. The other question you need to ask yourself, as the founder and the board needs to ask, is how long will you stay on as founder? If you are the CEO or executive director, again, synonymous terms, you need to ask yourself what's going to work best. What's going to work best for the organization and what's going to work best for me. When one of the organizations I co-founded, my plan was to be able to leave after 2 years. I would use all the skills and resources I had to build and co-create, because it wasn't just me, the infrastructure and the accounting and the all the things that we needed, the operations, board governance. I would co-create all of those things. So in 2 years, they wouldn't need me, or they would need very little from me. I then stayed on, I did that. I stayed on 2 years, and then I stayed on for another 3 months to do some advising, which they barely needed me. So you know what that tells me? I did something right. I want to be dispensable as the founder. I want to get the organization set up, and then I want to let it fly. And it takes a lot of humility to be able to say, I'm going to let this go. I'm going to let somebody else lead it. I'm not going to make it about me. It's really hard. There were many nights that I was like, oh my God, they're doing it wrong. And even today, this was a few years ago, they had a panel with the founders of the organization, and it wasn't me and it wasn't the co-founder. And I thought, well, that's bold. And the people who said they were the founders were not. That, it takes a lot to like sit back and go, well, the organization has moved on and I'm not even a memory. And that's what therapy is for. Is I could go to therapy and talk about that. But it doesn't matter. The legacy is that the organization still exists and they're doing well and they're evolving. And all the practices I put in place still there? Hell no. Does that make me sad? Yes. But again, it's not about me. I mean, if there's anything about this episode, it's like not about me. All right, let's switch over to thinking. Oh, I almost forgot one thing before we switch over. So in terms of the executive director leaving, I would say 3 to 5 years, 5 on the outside. 2 was pretty ambitious, but that was the vision I had for leaving. If you are on the board, and this is true of any board, you need board terms and board term limits. You should go away. Founders should go away. Board members should go away. If you are, and this connects with the last bit I shared, is that if you are not being compensated as the executive director, if you're doing it pro bono, it makes it that much harder for the board and the staff to ask you to leave. So that's another reason to be thoughtful about that. If you're on the board as the founder, having term limits means you have to leave in a certain amount of time. Everybody has to rotate. And that's another conversation about staggering. We can talk about term limits in a different episode. But typical board terms are either 2 to 3 years with a term limited to like 2 or 3 terms. And typically it's anywhere between 6 and 9 years. 9 years is a long time, in my opinion, to be on a board. I highly recommend no more than 6 years. I like 2-year term limits personally, but I'm a low commitment person. I like to underdeliver. Nope. I like to underpromise and overdeliver. I definitely do not like to underdeliver. So term limits, really important. Come up with a plan as a founder for when you're going to leave. Okay, last piece, leaving the organization. So we've talked about starting as a founder, acting as a founder. Now we're going to talk about leaving the organization. The key to leaving your organization as a founder is succession planning from the beginning. And in fact, there's actually a great book published by BoardSource, all on succession planning, and they have great tools and resources on succession planning. I also have written succession plans for organizations. And so the reason I bring this up is that there's templates that you can use. And so you're literally like answering questions and filling things out from the beginning. But succession planning from the beginning allows you as the founder to have perspective on, what do I want this to look like when I leave? So everything you're doing is building out for that. And I'm telling you, it's a different mindset and it works great. When you do leave, I think like what I did, I liked, I probably didn't need to do it, but I liked it, was making sure you're available when you leave the organization, but for a finite period of time. I picked 3 months. If you have a new executive director coming in and replacing you, ask them what they want. Don't tell them what you're going to do. That makes all the difference. What do you want from me? How can I be of service to you? Again, don't put your board members in a position where they would need to ask you to leave, either as a board member or as a staff member, as the CEO. You don't want to trap the nonprofit with your ego. When there is a new executive director who comes in, they are going to do things differently. Organizations need different things at different times. They're going to do things differently, and it's probably going to bug the hell out of you. And that is just going to have to be meditate, go for a walk, let it go, because let them do what they need to do, because they're not about you, and it's not easy. Nonprofit organizations go through organizational life cycle stages, and they're not prescriptive, and there's different, models, but Susan Kenney Stevens has probably the most, and TCC Group probably have the most common models. And it's the idea is that you start at like that startup phase and, organizing startup, and go into growth and maintenance, basically, mature organizations. And then there can be what's called a decline, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because it's an opportunity for renewal back to that growth phase. And sometimes defunct isn't bad either. You're going out of business, and maybe that's because you achieved your mission. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's because you started an Italian restaurant because you like pasta and don't know anything about running a nonprofit business, and that happens too. So sometimes people go straight from startup to defunct, which is a bummer, but that's how that goes. So if as a founder, you're probably coming in at that startup phase, and as the organization evolves, you might go into a growth phase, or you might be at more of a maturity phase, or going into a maturity phase. That's when you need different leadership. Different people have different skills. Even in consulting, I tell people I tend to work with organizations in a growth or a renewal phase. Some in a maturity phase where they're doing a lot of maintaining. They have a well-oiled machine, right? And I may provide some additional sprinkles of support here and there that will make them even better. But you need different leadership with different experiences in various phases. I was always really good at that growth phase because I can see where the gaps are and provide resources and leadership and approach to help fill them. The other thing to consider is when you're transitioning from the founder to the next executive director, a really cool and worthwhile strategy is hiring an interim executive director. That mental leap from the founder to a new CEO can be really tough for folks. And so I recommend that people, if you have the money, to have an interim CEO come in for 6 months, maybe tighten things up, fill in gaps where they existed. And then while the board is doing a search for a new executive director, you've got somebody who's like made the package pretty for the new person. It helps a lot. I actually recommend it for most organizations because it's mentally and psychologically, it's just kind of a nice transition. They can be interim executive directors can be pricey, but totally worth it. The value's there if you find the right person. Make sure it's somebody who understands organizational life cycles, board development, all of those things. But let the new leader be a good fit for the organization's life cycle stage. And again, you can Google nonprofit life cycle stages and come up with some stuff. And then let them lead. Let it be a little uncomfortable. Let it be a little, clunky or sticky. It's okay. It'll work out. Just have some faith. If the person's not the right fit, let them go sooner rather than later. But assuming you've done your due diligence, going through a strong recruitment process for that role, you should be in good shape. As the founder, you got to think about whether or not you're going to be in that role of helping to recruit the next CEO. Probably pretty dicey. Most of us don't have the objectivity that we would need to help identify the next leader after us. It's pretty tough. So be very, very careful with that. Last couple things I would say is if you are the chief executive of the organization as the founder, don't then move to the board. Then you're just going to micromanage the next CEO. You think you won't, but you're gonna. It's really, really hard. Or if you want to be on the board, don't do it right then. Go do something else and then come back to the board. Vice versa. Don't go from the board to being the CEO. You need to go away. Come back, and everybody thinks they're the exception, right? I'm sure anybody who is in one of those roles thinking about just switching from ED to board or board to ED is going, well, I'm different. Yeah, I understand. Just don't. Go do something else. Go sit for a while. Go on a vacation. Go work for another nonprofit. You don't need to keep staying with the organization. You're just putting on a different mask. And again, that's about you. That's not about the organization. It's not about the mission. Boy, I sound like fun, don't I? Don't bring me to a cocktail party. I'll talk your ear off about this. In closing, all of these things that we've talked about are really, really important. What you need to think about starting out as a founder, acting as the founder, and leaving the organization as a founder. One of the greatest things, and this is sort of the punchline, is that you want to avoid founder syndrome. Founder syndrome is when the founder won't leave, the founder has stayed too long, the founder is making it about them, they're controlling things, they're dominating the board, the staff, they're really displacing everybody else because they know the way to do things. Nonprofits are far more collective and participatory in the way that they run organizations, especially at the ground level like this. So again, the greatest leaders, whether founders or not, know their strengths, know their challenges, approach leadership with curiosity, ask questions, find people with skills and perspectives that challenge them, that give them new perspectives to learn from. Bringing in people are homogenous with your thinking, your perspective, your life experience will not advance the mission and the goals. And I'll say it again, is once the organization has tax exemption status, it is no longer your baby. It is a separate identity from you. And all of this, if you're a founder and you're listening to all of this and you're like, yeah, duh, I got it. Great. Way to go. Now go pass the information on to somebody who doesn't get it. So again, these are businesses. You know, I want people before they start their nonprofit businesses to really understand all that goes into it and go in as eyes wide open as possible with as clear expectations as possible, because it's hard work and it's harder than you think it's going to be. Most of the time, people think of nonprofits as, lemonade stand. I know there's Alex's Lemonade Stand, which is his own nonprofit. That's not what I'm talking about. It's not simple. It's complex, and there's a lot of things to think about. If I've burst your bubble, sorry, and I'm not sorry, because I want you to know what you're getting into and what to think about. This is for your sanity. This is for your mental health, and this is, for the mission of the organization and the nonprofit sector as a whole. Okay. I would really, really love to hear your stories, your experiences when it comes to founding nonprofits, either you've worked with a founder, or you are a founder, or you might become a nonprofit founder. I want to hear them. I would also love for you to share this with somebody. I'd love for you to comment. I'd love for you to subscribe, subscribe. I'm new here. All of the things. And I just want to get the word out to people that this podcast is a resource of information. I'm one person. It's a world according to Emily based on my experience and my knowledge. But why not share it? And then people can have conversations and get engaged in this. I think, it's a hard time. And I have a lot of sympathy for what we're all going through in terms of fear. And I also don't want to give up hope. Hope doesn't have an expiration date. Right now, we need hope to keep going. There may be people starting grassroots organizations in the light of hope. And I just want you to have the information to be successful and to serve your communities, because ultimately this is about being of service. So I'm really glad you joined me. Thank you for being here. If you got anything out of this, let me know. I'd love to hear from you. All right. Next episode 5, coming soon. Have a great day. Thanks for being here.